Hey, welcome everybody to this month's webinar. I'm Russell Graves coming to you from Hackberry Farm, Dodge City, Texas. Hey, because of a scheduling conflict, I was unable to do this live this week, but I still wanted to go ahead and bring you this webinar. So I'm going to pre-record it and put it out to the to everyone that signed up uh, here in a day or two. So you'll be able to watch this. I think it's an important thing. And I think if you follow along, it'll definitely help your photography and really help your storytelling abilities. And so that's what this whole thing's all about. At the end of the, usually I make these webinars dialogues and not monologues. So at the end of this, if you've got any questions at all about what I do or what I'm thinking or anything else, I've included my email address. Feel free to send me an email. I'd be happy to answer your questions. If we need to go in too much detail, let me know. We can even schedule a Zoom meeting if you want to go over more of this stuff. So anyway, with that said, let's talk about photography B-roll. One of the things that really transformed my ability to take pictures, especially professionally, was just being able to see kind of beyond what that main subject is. And so through this presentation, I'll define what B-roll is. I will talk with you a little bit about some of the things that the approaches that I take on how I determine what to take pictures of, just when you're not talking about just a main subject. And so it helps to define what is B-roll. And B-roll is actually a film and TV term that's supplemental or alternative footage that you intercut with the main shoot. So if you watch any kind of TV show or any kind of movie, you may have the scene where or a couple of actors are talking to each other, and then all of a sudden the B-roll may be just a kind of a cutaway shot of something going on in the background, or a detail shot, or something that's kind of going on right there in their environment at the same time. It's not really focusing on the main subject, it's focusing on everything else around them. And using B-roll in video and television as a storytelling technique. And it's used to kind of enhance the story, because imagine, if you will, what it would be like if every TV show was just, or every movie was shot with just a single angle. And you have this long running dialogue of just the actors interacting with one another, really nothing else. And so if you start watching movies, and that's how one of the ways I learned what we're talking about today is just really paying attention to movies. If you start watching movies, they have, and this term's not used much anymore, but they'd have A roll, which would be the main camera, and that's focusing on the main subjects. Then they'd have the B roll that would really kind of focus on all the details around the shot and all the details of the environment where the action's taking place. And so for this, I want you to adopt that role and talk and think in terms of all these extra shots as photography B-roll. This is of the Perseid meteor shower that happened, I guess last week, not yesterday, but I shot this picture about a week ago, last Saturday. And so this is on the north end of my, about midway across my farm, on the north end of the pasture right in front of my house. And those are some of the meteorites that were falling. And so how does the B-roll concept benefit photographers? And I think that's why everyone watches these webinars, is to understand or to get strategies that'll help you in your photography. And so how does the B-roll concept benefit photographers? And again, I'll say, when I started, I look back, and two things that I learned as a photographer that really kind of transformed my career professionally. One is, I learned how to shoot convincing pictures of people. And when I say pictures of people, I don't mean pictures of people just, like portraits of people. I mean people doing things and being able to capture them doing real life things, almost from a documentary style. And that really helped out the commercial work I was doing. Another thing that really helped out the editorial work I was doing was learn this storytelling concept, and learning the concept of B-roll and how to utilize it in my photography. And so there's a lot of different ways I think just using the B-roll concept can benefit photographers. It teaches you to see the entire scene. And so you don't get focused on just the main subject, but you start over time, once you kind of adopt this practice, you start really kind of looking at everything. I'll show you some examples towards the end, but you may be doing a shot on red squirrels, for example. And you always need the shot of the red squirrels, but there's a whole lot bigger story to tell about red squirrels than just the squirrel themselves. And so you start training yourself to see the entire scene, and then once you start training yourself to see the entire scene, you realize that there's a whole lot more pictures that you can take if you just kind of learn how to see and train your eye to see them. And the second thing I think it does, it teaches you to use all the tools in your proverbial tool bag. And what I mean by tool bag is your camera backpack or your case or whatever you carry, but really learning how to use all the lenses that you carry along with you. Uh, One of my favorite things to do is, and I've talked about it before, is using a 50 millimeter lens to really stretch my creativity and make me learn to see scenes in a different way. Because when you've got that limitations of just a single focal length, I think it makes you become a better photographer, because you start learning again to see an entire scene. But you start learning all the tools in your tool bag, and you start using all your different lenses to help tell a story. I've got this program on my computer called Photo Statistica, and I can take a look at how I've used all of my gear, and it makes me proud to see that of any given year I use all my lenses about equally as much. Now some years it'll skew different ways, but for the most part I use my 85 millimeter lens as much as I use my 500 millimeter lens, as much as I use my 16 to 35, and so on. And so you start learning how to use all these tools in your tool bags, and not only the lenses, also all the gadgets you may have acquired over time, like extension tubes or external flashes and all those things. Once you start kind of learning to see an entire scene, then that forces you to try to solve that photographic problem of how do you take compelling pictures of that B-roll stuff that you see. So I think it's valuable in that regard as well. And it's a valuable way to supplement a collection of images. I talk a lot about that stories, every good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But it's those details that you tell in a story that makes that kind of enriches the story and rounds it out. And so shooting B-roll, it's a valuable way to supplement the collection of images. You may have a collection of images on say, again, pick a subject, let's say uh wild turkeys, and you can have a lot of beauty shots of wild turkeys over and over and over. But when you start adding this B-roll concept, you supplement that collection of images, and it makes that collection a lot richer and a lot more valuable from a storytelling standpoint. And this is good too. Anytime you're looking for pictures, you train your eye to spot details. And an old time mentor, and this sounds a little bit trite to say, but it really is true. An old time mentor one time told me that everyone can take a picture, but not everyone can see a picture. And so as you learn to see, and you train your eye to look for pictures, and you train your eye what good composition is, and how to take pictures really of mundane objects and make them look interesting and compelling. You start training your eye, you start learning how to spot details. And so you go to the Great Smoky Mountains, and obviously the mountains are the star of the show, and the bears are the star of the show, but there's a whole lot of supporting cast in that movie that you can take a picture of. But you got to train your eyes how to spot those details and how to take pictures of all that kind of stuff. And as kind of alluded to before, it helps fill out your photo stories. It helps add those details that really help enrich the story and make it where you can follow it longer. It's one of the things I recommend to people when we do workshops is take pictures and use that storytelling model of taking pictures. So when you get back, yeah, you may have a couple of prints for your walls, but I encourage people to go to places like Blurb and have you a book made. And so when you have a book made, it's not just the same style of picture over and over and over again. You've got all these different detail shots that you shot, the B-roll stuff that you shot throughout the shoot, that you can use to supplement those photo stories. It may not be the star of the show, but they're good supporting characters that really will help fill your story out and help tell the story you're trying to tell. And ultimately it teaches you visual storytelling, and I think that's valuable as photographers to learn. It's one thing to take a really nice picture, and we can all do that. We've all got the capability of doing that. But it's quite another thing to really start thinking about in terms of telling a story with pictures. And the old saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words, it's true. But if you're going to get enough pictures to tell some kind of longer and compelling story, you got to have a lot of pictures. And you do that by varying your pictures during a different shoot. And so part of that visual storytelling is just taking a variety of pictures, and it's just making photo essays is what you're doing. This is I always like filling in pictures in between and telling the story. This is actually on my property as well. This was a tree frog that's on my wetland, and they really show up in big numbers in May. And we had a lot this year, but they're only about an inch long, but they're really photogenic, and they're really cool. And they're always in a good spot to take a picture like this one. We talked about the Smoky Mountains. This is which the owl shot was taken on my property here, but the mountains and the water, those are all shots that help tell the story of any given location. When you just focus on the mountains, even though the place is called the Great Smoky Mountains, when you just focus on the mountains, then all of a sudden that story becomes repetitive over time. So it does you good to start searching out for details. It's easy to see details like water like this, but within that shot of water, there's about another 50 shots you could take if you just have the right mentality and learn to start looking for details. And so, as always, I like to give you some examples. So here's how I do it. Step one, I take my 3 shots, and I've mentioned this before, and uh, and I'm going to use on this particular webinar. I'm going to talk about how I take my 3 shots that are. This is if I'm telling a wildlife story. If I'm telling a landscape story or a location story, it's a little different, but it's kind of the same. So I take my 3 shots, and my 3 shots are what I call the yearbook shot. If you think back to your yearbook photo at school, that yearbook shot is just a portrait of you so you can identify what you are. So I've got the yearbook shot as one of my 3 shots I take. And then I take the habitat shot, and then it shows the animal kind of in this larger habitat to kind of give you a sense of place and setting. If you think about it, if you watch a movie, almost every movie starts out with a wide shot, and that's to set the sense of place. And so we've got a habitat shot. And then the third shot is we have an action shot of the animal actually doing something. And so I try to nail those 3 shots first. And I think when you're telling a story, particularly about any kind of animal, let's say you go to Alaska and you want to photograph bears, and that's the actual example I'm going to show you in a minute of how I kind of put one of these photo stories together. And it all starts with these 3 shots: the yearbook shot, the habitat shot, the action shot. And so once I get these 3 shots, and I get them hopefully compelling shots to begin with, but I'll shoot a lot of different shots like this: animal doing something, the animal in its habitat, and then just a close-up shot of the animal to be able to identify what it is. Once I get those 3 shots nailed down, the next thing I'll do is look for wide angle opportunities like landscapes. And these landscape shots are just really going to kind of set the scene. And it's really going to kind of give you an idea of where that animal lives from a broader sense. If you tell a story about yourself, for example, and if you live in a city somewhere, it may have, like, if you live, the closest city to me is Dallas. Your shot may be an iconic wide angle shot of the landscape with the downtown area, so you can recognize where it is, or you can at least recognize that it's in a city. And then so your next, that's kind of your scene setting shot. And then after that, you go in, and if you think about, again, you're doing a photo story on yourself, you've got those 3 primary shots: the yearbook shot, the action shot, and the habitat shot. And so the landscapes help really kind of set the scene and tell a broader story. Like these shots like this, they've got some detail in them, but they're not overloading in detail. They're mainly just a broad shot that just kind of sets the sense of place. This is Caddo Lake here. This was actually shot with a drone, but it kind of gives you a sense of place. So this is sunrise on the swamps in Caddo Lake. And then this is sunrise in the Okavango Delta. Again, there's a bunch of different shots I could go pick out. I could find wildlife in this shot if I wanted to. I could go take pictures of just the individual pieces of grass. I could go take pictures of the trees in the background. But the landscape shot, the scene setting shot, is just kind of a general shot in nature. And then step 3, so step 1 is get the 3 shots. Step 2 is look for landscape shots. Step 3 is focus on the details. And it's those details that help round out the story. And so I start looking down at my feet. I start looking all around. And mainly the detail shots are stuff that are going to be fairly close, but I really try to focus on all kinds of details. and try to get a real understanding of what's kind of going on around it. Again, think about a movie, watch a movie. And so the detail shots, for example, maybe just some close-ups of some fall leaves. I mean, on its own, this shot right here, it's kind of an intriguing shot. It's a pretty shot, but on its own, it's not, it's a piece of the puzzle. And so I'm going to include those puzzle pieces that will help you tell the entire story when it's all said and done. And details vary, like on the example of the armadillo, it may be just a shot of some of its body parts like this. I love doing that. When I was in Botswana, elephant feet, elephant trunks, elephant eyes, real as close up as you can get of the animals just to show details. I've done a lot with white-tailed deer. I do a lot with turkeys. Any kind of animal I can start shooting detail shots, I do. It may be other animals or other critters within that environment. If I'm doing a story on my property here, I've got to include the little stuff like the frog and like these jumping spiders. And so I'm going to start looking for details. And then I'm also going to shoot pictures of plants, and I love looking at plants, but that's all part of the environment where you start looking at details. And once you start getting those detail shots, again, the 3-step method I use is the wide shot, or is the 3 shots that we talked about of the animal. For example, if you're doing one of an animal, the yearbook shot, the habitat shot, and action shot. Get those 3 shots nailed, because usually those are the hardest to do if you're working with wildlife. And then after you get those 3 shots nailed down and you're comfortable with the quality of your shots and the number of your shots, then I start looking for landscape shots. Then I start looking for detail shots. And then if you use that simple 1, 2, 3-step approach each time, you just start remembering that, and it becomes rote memory over time. And you just start, like me, I don't even think about it anymore. Once I know I've got my 3 shots nailed of the particular wildlife species, then I go into detail and really storytelling mode and trying to tell the complete story. And so here's the results. I put this together today. This is a story I did. I call it Bear Country. And some of these shots are that I just picked them real quick. They're not super high resolution. So if you look at them a little soft, just realize I was just really kind of trying to work and put this together quick. So this is from these are a few select images from a trip I did back in July of 21 off the Alaskan Peninsula when we went down there doing a workshop on bears. And so I call this Bear Country. So the first shot I lead with is really just kind of that habitat shot, the animal and kind of the habitat we were in, which is primarily open grasslands. And so as you start kind of, oops, went too far. There we go. So as you start telling the story, you can start mixing and matching these shots. And again, you can you can see as I go through this, it would start to get repetitive if I just included bear shot after bear shot after bear shot after bear shot. Instead, I start sprinkling in some of those landscape shots to give a sense of place, and some of those detail shots you'll see as we come along. Like in this shot, and these were kind of laid. I put a little thought into how they were laying out. Like an example, on the bear on the right, I really wanted a wide shot to show the habitat, and you can see if you really study the picture, you can see where we're at was a combination of marsh flats. You can see the water above the bear in the background, and then mountains. And so to complement the mountains, I wanted to do more of a wider shot of some of the mountain peaks in the distance. And then then a picture of the bear kind of walking along the shore. And these, if you start kind of varying your shots, and this is just kind of the different moods of the weather we experienced. These pictures were taken at different parts of the mountains, but roughly in the same place. And we had a couple of good days of weather, and we had a couple of days where the weather would kind of sock in a little bit, but it just gives you a sense of habitat. There's no bears in either of these pictures, and these pictures were shot as true panoramas, but it just gives you an idea of what the scene looks like and where we were at. And and again, we mentioned the shooting pictures of flowers, but one of my favorite things to do, and to me, this is the sort of the holy grail of all wildlife species. When I'm shooting pictures of wildlife, if I can find some really good tracks, that makes me happy. I love photographing tracks. I've got quite an extensive collection of animal track images, and so I'm always on the lookout for good track pictures. And so this right here, and this was actually ended up being the cover of a magazine. This shot here was one of my favorite bear track shots I've ever taken. It kind of tells a story all on its own of the tracks leading out to the tidal flats where those bears would feed. And so look for pictures like this, because even though it's a landscape picture at heart, this picture tells a broader story of the animals that live and where they live. And so that was the uh, that was really my main focus there. And again, more bear shots, but doesn't always have to be really close up bear shots. I love shots like this that kind of show the animals in their broader habitat. Uh, this is, and I learned this in doing magazine work, but when you do a shot like this, it may appear as a double page spread in a magazine. And the reason why, and if you're putting your go to the own books, you can think of these from a design standpoint. And the reason why, it gives you a lot of blank space that if you want to put words on top of this, if you want to write a story to go along with your photo story, you've got plenty of options to be able to put words or titles right on top. And you can kind of see how I did it right there with just bear country. And then just kind of mixing up the details between the detail shots and the animal shots and everything else. This the picture on the right, you can kind of see its claws, but this is the same bear. As the bear passed, I focused in on its feet, and I was a conscious decision. I wanted to get a picture of just its feet, because again, those are those detail shots I talked about that I try to take a lot of these animals that just it's like you and I, or it's like if you've got kids. When my kids were little, uh, they were cute all on their own, but when you start focusing on things like hands and feet and trying to pick up those details, it would make a huge difference on just your kind of the emotional appeal of the pictures. And so the shot of the bear's feet is one I really, really, really like. And yeah, I guess from a design standpoint, it might make sense to put it closer to the ones with that one showing the tracks, but I didn't put a whole lot of thought into design, just kind of did a quick design as I went through this. And these are more landscape shots, just to kind of show the habitat and where we were at. It's nothing, none of these pictures on their own are going to win any kind of awards or anything like that. But when you kind of put together as total, it kind of tells a complete story, and it kind of leads the viewer through uh, the experience that you had. And as much as anything, it leads to to comments, and questions like, one of the common questions I got is, well, did you see the moose that antler fell off of? And we didn't. I mean, we just found the antler out in this sedge field, but it made a compelling picture nonetheless, because another thing, if you start looking at detail, and I didn't include this picture in there, but if you look at the edge of this moose antler, you can see where it's been chewed on. Well, what does that? And so if you could tell the next level of that story and get pictures of porcupines or wolves or whatever else has been chewing on that, uh, it helps kind of tell the story more. And by the way, animals chew on antlers to get the calcium out of them. So because those antlers are made of bone and they fall off every year, and it's just one of the things that it just leads on another tangent of another story. And so it's one of those things that if you start looking, you find details everywhere. And this is just, I use this shot as a background shot. It's just a picture of the moon I took. Again, just one of those details that may seem mundane. There may not be much to it, but it also kind of points to, what it was like during that time when we went. A lot of these places that we get to go, and I say we, meaning everyone listening to this webinar too, maybe the only time you're there. And so while you're there, I think you do yourself a favor by shooting every picture you can to tell the who, what, where, when, and why of a location. Yeah, it may be just about the bears, but those bears live somewhere, and what does it look like where they live, and what's the impact they're leaving behind, and just try to get a sense of that whole story where those bears live. And then I dedicated this picture to just the different bears that we saw. These bears weren't all big and fluffy. Their coats weren't good. They were kind of ragged. They were wet. It was kind of a wet week, and also it was just during the middle of the summer when they're just trying to hustle and make a living and trying to fatten up. The fish hadn't started coming in yet, so they weren't eating on fish. They were eating on sedge grass most of the time, and digging for clams when they could find them. And so it's just an overall. You know, when you look at pictures like this, you just realize overall this is how they are. So from the three shot standpoint, you kind of got a yearbook shot there, and you got a habitat shot with the mom and the cub, and then you've got a picture of the bears actually doing something where they're showing each other affection on the bottom left. So that's sort of what I try to get. And it's probably my favorite shot of the bunch here. And you can see he's eating the sedge grasses, which tells a story. You know, you show this to someone, they're like, "Well, hey, I thought bears just ate fish. I didn't even know they ate things like sedge grasses." And that's kind of leads, you know, from a storytelling standpoint, leads you down another tangent to be able to tell more about what they eat and what you experienced when you saw them. And so, in a nutshell, uh, that's kind of how I do it. And I know this webinar lasted or went pretty quick, but it's if you notice, whenever we do these live, I always take questions as I go through there, and it helps kind of drag things out. And so I'm just going to go through before I go any further, and again, just kind of go through. I'll recap again about what I do. Step one is, I reiterated this a bunch. I take my three shots. Step two, I look for wide angle opportunities like landscapes. And it wouldn't hurt you if you take notes on these three steps and put them in a on your iPhone to help you remember when you're out. And then step three, I focus on details. And if you notice this exercise I took you through on bear country, it checked all those boxes. You've got kind of the habitat shot there. You've got a little bit of a habitat shot on the left and the right, but then you've got the landscape shot, the step two, more landscape shots, details on this one. And there's no formula on how you should lay them out. It's just in general, more of the habitat shot here, and then the yearbook shot on the right. And this is just a good detail shot on two detail shots on the left, and then more landscapes here and a little bit of detail, more detail with the bear tracks and the flower, and then landscapes with the moon. And then we talked about this being the three shots again. It's just it's a whole mindset and a whole protocol that you go through on taking pictures. And again, once you kind of get those three steps committed to memory, and I would encourage you to reiterate. I'd encourage you to put notes on your phone, so when you're out taking pictures, you start to kind of think in this way. And it's like riding a bicycle. Once you commit it to muscle memory, it becomes pretty easy to do over and over again. Where you get to the point you really don't have to think about it anymore. But if anyone has any questions that you want to follow up, again, russell@russellgraves.com. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to answer any questions you have. I'll make this offer too, since I had to do this webinar like this week. If you get hung up on anything, or if you need any if you have any questions that you can't figure out or anything else, if you want to schedule a Zoom meeting with me, I'd be glad to do that. We'll get together on some dates and times and be able to schedule a Zoom meeting. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I appreciate you signing up for the webinar this week. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you.